The next section of this video, I want to talk about anticipation and identification of lobs. I've already gone over each of the four main positions that everybody might be in on the court and how close you should be trying to get it first. Now I want to talk in each of those four situations. Now I want to talk about identifying what's coming from your opponents and anticipating it. Very often, I see doubles players position themselves well on the court. They don't overplay themselves. They don't get too close and give their opponents a big space of court behind them. However, they just don't see the lob coming. They don't realize that it's very likely, based on their opponents or based on other things that are going on the court, and they end up reacting late, and a shot that should have been taken out of the air all of a sudden is landing behind them, and they end up having their offensive position bite them in the butt because they weren't reacting in time to be able to take advantage of the lob, which again, I've said this before, you should want to be lobbed. Closing into the net, part of why you're doing that is because you want your opponents to play defensive shots. And from those defensive shots, you and your partner should have offensive opportunities. And if repeatedly they play defensive shots and it puts you in a defensive position back, you did something wrong. And it's not that your tactics necessarily were incorrect. Don't take that to mean that playing two up at the net is the wrong tactic or the wrong way to go. It just means that you need to pay closer attention to what's going on and position yourself accordingly and be prepared accordingly. So the first part of this I want to talk about is your opponent's patterns and tendencies. And I've mentioned this briefly already earlier in this video, and that has to do basically with what your opponents like to do. Some opponents you'll play, you'll get to this position, you and your partner will both come into the net, but play it relatively safe and just be more or less on top of the service line. And this baseline player will be smart enough to identify that and continue to drive the ball and try to get it to your feet or try to get it between you and have his or her partner then try to cut the next shot off. Other players are just crazy psycho lobbers. And if you play much doubles, you have played somebody like this, where you even, and I have seen this all the time. Let's say we have a server back on this side with the ball, returner's partner on this side. Just at the very hint of closing in, say the serve goes in play, bounces, returner hits the ball and starts closing in. They don't even get in as far as here before the next shot is hit by the server, and the server's already trying to lob over the top of them, and they're just in no man's land. They haven't even made it all the way up to the net yet before the baseline player over here starts to lob already. Some people just lob at the very first sign of offense from their opponents. Regardless of which style of player you play, you have to be able to be paying close enough attention to those patterns and those tendencies from your opponent that you start to read and see it coming. And it just comes down to that, paying attention. Some players love to lob, some players hate to lob, in which case you don't want to be here. You want to do your best to get close because they're driving everything, and you don't want the balls to be coming down to your feet. So get in close, take it higher, and then attack to the opposite net player. But this all comes back to the patterns and the tendencies, and that's really the core and the base of all good tennis tactics, is seeing what your opponents are doing and making an adjustment accordingly. So I've never, while I am an advocate of playing offensively and getting close, I am not telling you, all of you watching, to just go right into the net, because that would be dumb. Some people lob a lot. And so you have to be able to make adjustments accordingly. And it all comes back to paying close attention and seeing what's coming next. That's a big part of anticipation. Next up, we're going to talk about four things here. Next up is the position of every player on the court. And we talked about that in the first section of this video, and we went over every single possible combination of positions on the court, or at least the four main ones. Understand that when you're in a position like the one I have on the screen right now, and you have a one isolated person who's in a very defensive position and he or she is the only one that's defensive, it just makes sense that at this juncture in the point, he or she is going to put up a lob. Understand that. Vice versa, understand and use this to your advantage by anticipating it, that when this player is up here and gets the ball, even if it's at his or her feet, it's very unlikely that he or she is going to lob, or if they do, it's not going to be very good most of the time. It's not to say it's impossible, but just understand, based on their position, it's unlikely this person will lob. Now, it's incredibly likely that they'll lob. Even if they like to drive, if at any point in an entire doubles match, this player is going to lob, it's going to be in this situation right here. And too often I see a team close in together and just be in a ready position, just split step right here, all the way up next to the net when the ball has just bounced and gone right to this baseline player, and then they just split step and stand there, and the lob goes up into the air, they turn around and watch it bounce behind them without any reaction. That's unacceptable. You have to be aware of your position on the court. And most of the time, this baseline player back here, when presented with both opponents in this position, is going to lob, period. And you need to know that and realize the position you're in and adjust accordingly. That means that if the shot previous to that, you had hit a shot and closed in, but the ball was not placed where you wanted it to go, maybe you wanted to hit in between these two players and try to put it away, or whatever reason occurred that the ball went right to the baseline player, you need to read this scenario and then adjust accordingly. Scoot back 2-3 steps quick before the ball gets struck by this player. That's right, I'm telling you to back up before it even gets hit, because staying in this position when the ball goes to this baseline player is not smart. Now, if this baseline player has shown a tendency to drive the heck out of every single shot, no matter what, and for whatever reason they just seem to think it's poor play to lob, then fine, this might be appropriate. Anything could be appropriate sometimes, but more than likely it's going to be a lob in this situation, and so you should see that coming, anticipate it, and adjust your position on the court accordingly. Don't stay in a super aggressive position when a lob is likely, and it's likely when a player is way back in a very defensive position behind the baseline. Just realize that. So pay close attention to the position of every player on the court. That's number 2. Number 3, pay close attention to the balance of the player getting ready to hit the ball. Maybe this player was trying to close in, but you hit a nice angle off the court, and this player is running and stretching to get it and is barely going to get a racket on it. This is where a lob is also very likely. If they are off balance, and especially if they're moving back away from the nets, maybe they got caught in no man's land, and you hit a deep volley to their feet, and they're backpedaling to try to get a racket on it quickly because they didn't want to take a volley from all the way back there, a lob is very likely. Or maybe they hit down the line, your partner hits between, and this player is going back to try to recover this shot after it bounces. Look for a lob in this situation. They're off the court, they're backing up actively, trying to get to a defensive position just to get a racket on the ball. Look for a lob. And so in this situation, again, it wouldn't be smart to close way in on top of the net. It wouldn't be smart. You should be either standing your ground in the middle of the box, or if this person likes to lob anyway, and you just put them in this position back here, identify it, anticipate that the lob is coming, and actually back up a couple of steps closer to the service line and anticipate that the lob is about to go up in the air, and you'll have a better chance at making the overhead. So look at the balance of your opponents. And I just lost my tennis ball. Sorry about that. Not sure how that happened. Here's another one. Okay. And lastly, technique and racket. Watch the racket of your opponents. This is a relatively advanced skill, but even if all 4 players are up at the net or in a net position, watch the racket of your opponents. They can only lob, well, not only, but most of the time, they're only going to lob if they open the racket face up and the racket gets below the ball and they get ready to start lifting the ball up into the air. It's possible they hit a topspin lob, and that's a lot more difficult to read because it's more like a regular ground stroke. Let's say they're back at the baseline and the ball bounces in front of them. It's possible that they could try to hit a topspin lob over the top of you, but that's a shot you're going to want to make them do at least once and then look for it after that. Most of the time when a player lobs, they're going to do it defensively with an open racket face with at least a little bit of backspin by just opening their strings and pushing and guiding the ball up into the air. Watch their technique. If they're falling backwards and they take the racket just straight back with an open racket face behind them, it's going up. And I can't even tell you how many times I'm teaching on the court and I see students up here at the net and one of them hits, maybe the ball went at their feet, so they played away from the net player. They hit it deep in the court, back over here. This player is backpedaling. They take the racket back, and I'm standing somewhere over here on the side of the court. I'm saying, lob, because I see it coming. And sure enough, the ball goes up as a lob, but both these players had just kind of stood there and watched it, and maybe they're able to turn around and run and go back and get it, but it should have been an overhead instead of allowing it to bounce and get back behind them where they're now in a defensive position instead of maintaining their offensive position. So watch the technique of your opponent's racket. Watch the racket face. Those are going to be huge keys and cues as to what's coming next. So in review, anticipation and identification, and this is a incredibly important section. And in the point play, the high level point play video, you'll see me pause and point out when certain players get in position, and myself and Kyle correctly anticipated that it was going to be a lob. We started moving back before the ball was even struck, and it's because we're watching these things. Opponents' patterns and tendencies, what they like to do and what they're good at, the position of every player on the court, especially the person who's about to hit the ball, the balance of that player, whether or not they're in good balance or bad balance, and the technique of what they're doing with their racket. If you look for all four of those things and take them into account, you and your partner can start to cover the court much more effectively because you will read and see what's coming next before it even happens. And just a half a second or 1 second jump on a lob makes all the difference in the world between taking it out of the air as an overhead and letting it bounce and running all the way back to the baseline, both you and your partner, and totally giving up the net. So it's incredibly important, and all four of those things are things that you should be keeping track of actively during a doubles match.